All right, I think we've just gone 5:30, so welcome everyone. We'll kick into it. No doubt people will drift in as the time goes on, so please forgive any distractions as I let those guys in. Um, as usual, if you've got questions or you want to talk about things, you've got discussion, please don't hesitate. You don't have to wait till the end. Jump in any time if there's something that pops up through the presentation. As you can see from the header there, unfortunately, not great news this month. We've reached new low point in the values as determined by the house price index, the Real Estate Institute House Price Index. I can't help it. I think there's a bit of echoing happening there. So if someone could, uh, maybe I can un, maybe I can mute you. Yep, there we go. Katie. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yep, that all sounds better. Thank you very much. Yeah, I can't help but wonder if there was some erosion of confidence on the for the from the buyers because we saw no change really, no material change in the amount of stock coming to the market. We just saw a weakness in the number of sales taking place. And remembering this data is when the actual unconditional agreements are reached. It's not when settlement takes place. So it's like real time feedback. So yep. Anyway, let's get into it. So this is median sale price. Broadly speaking, you can see the trend there is generally sideways, but obviously, if you look closely, it has been gradually, very slowly eroding over the last couple of years, or 2.5 years or so. Interestingly, the last improvement in sale prices here, or median prices, was kind of around election time. This, of course, is a 6-month moving average, so there's a bit of a delay in that. But that uptick was as a result of tightness in the market as we headed into the election. And we'll look at this a bit later, but generally, there is a common perception that selling before an election is a very bad idea, and that means typically stock tightens up, which ironically makes it a good idea to sell before an election. And since the last election, values have been slowly eroding. But the median sale price is not the best guide for that. The best guide for that is the Real Estate Institute House Price Index. So let's look at that. And as I said at the top, 27.7% down since the peak in Wellington. That is a new low point. Not by very much, but nonetheless, things aren't materially getting better. As per the last slide, they're not getting all that much worse either, but it's still, if you get out the fine-tooth comb, it still is gradual erosion over the last 2 years or so. Auckland not far behind us at 23 and a bit percent. Um, Over the last year, again, we've fallen further than anywhere else, and we have seen significant weakness in the last 3 months. Now, interestingly, the whole country has seen a deterioration. You can see that from 1.7% down across the whole country. We have dipped steeper than that at 3.5%, or thereabouts. Again, I wonder if this is confidence after, or an erosion of confidence after the government announcing further public sector job cuts. Of course, one of the phenomenons is that, and we've done a podcast about this recently, talking about is the number of cuts proposed for Wellington, is that a lot? Is it really that big a deal? These people will find other ways to contribute to the economy, and hopefully it'll be good in the long run, but certainly not good in the short run. But it is the nature, I think, of humans, but also, of people in general, but also, in particular, the nature of public servants being a bit more conservative types, is that when they find out that there are some job cuts coming, it's not a few thousand people that close their wallets, it's everybody. that closes their wallets. They all worry about, is this going to be me? And so, to a certain degree, it certainly impacts the spending habits of everybody. And so, maybe this downturn, and that's we've seen that's a bit steeper in Wellington than typically around the country, is a reflection of that. But this is, of course, all just guesswork. There's the house price index in a graph. So you can see there that orange line is the 3 month cumulative change. And so a steep drop off there. We were in reasonable positive territory that we hadn't seen for 12 or 18, 12 or 15 months. We're now in negative territory, very quickly changed from positive to negative. Um, and we are more negative, as you can see there, as I've said, since have seen since July 2024. So almost 2 years it's been since we've seen a drop of this much in Wellington over a 3 month period. Now, interestingly, I mentioned just before the run into the election, and the election was here, of course, October 23. So you can see there a significant improvement there in prices or values going to the election. But I've got a bit more data specifically around that in a bit later. And there it is, Wellington City. So Wellington City tends to be a bit more volatile, but the theme is still the same. We've gone from quite significantly positive over 3 months to quite significantly negative over 3 months. Yeah, so it hasn't been a great few months. Now let's look at supply coming on. You can see here, I mean, I think that if you look at that red line and paying attention to the general trend of things is probably more instructive than most other things. Broadly speaking, we see sales between 600 and 800 on average in a month. We saw a significant drop off here as we hit in COVID because that captured very low sales volumes for a couple of months as we were locked down. Then we saw the post-COVID boom, lots and lots of sales reaching a peak up here in sort of early-ish 2022. Then vendors realized, oh, crikey, Dick, I've missed the boat. Prices are falling, and I'm seeing people I know try to sell their house and fail. It's really hard again, and so. But the economy hadn't ground to a halt yet. Interest rates were still very low. Employment was still full. No one was under pressure to sell, and so everyone just went, "Oh well, if that's how hard it's going to be, I don't need to sell, so I'm just going to hang on." And so we saw new listings falling right away, and ironically, we saw new listings fall way below the levels that we saw even during COVID lockdowns. Then that was into the election. So then here's the election here. As soon as the election was over, all these people who'd been holding their properties back dumped their properties on the market in their infinite wisdom that no one should sell before the election. They should wait for after the election, because the people at least perceive that creates some certainty, and that's a good idea to sell in certainty. And of course, the summer effect. So a whole lot of property came to the market. And ironically, that made it a whole lot harder to sell, and values, as we will see soon, weakened again. Anyway, we've been seeing new listing volumes kind of return to that normal band, albeit sort of slightly at the lower end on average of normal, and with the seasonal ups and downs. And that is no different to what we're seeing at the moment. May 633 new listings versus 632 a year ago, and compared to 931 2 years ago. I have to admit, I did a double take when I saw that. That's an enormous volume of new listings in May 2024. I went back to my source data, and it was this huge spike in that month alone. So slightly artificial comparing it to May 2024 because it was a big jump. I even then went back to the original data that I get it from, realestate.co. Indeed, that number is accurate, at least accurate according to their reporting. It does seem odd, but obviously, as a seller, what you want to see here is new listings, the flow of supply coming to the market. We want to see that tightening up. As a real estate agent, we want to see plenty of things to sell. But as an owner, you want to see new supply tightening so it makes it easier to compete for the attention of the buyers. So we're not seeing things tighten. Compared to 2 years ago, yes, but that was a weird month. But broadly speaking, we are seeing supply going sideways. So it's not getting worse from a new supply standpoint. Um, the conditions are not improving from this standpoint, from a owner's perspective at least. Um, and compared to what's normal in May, uh, we were slightly below. So I guess that's a positive from a seller's perspective. But it's not a big number. It's 633 versus 659, so slightly below normal. This is looking at it kind of seasonally. The amount of property coming to the market compared to 12 months ago. You see there was a huge amount of variability, firstly way below the x-axis, meaning major tightening of new supply coming to market, then a major explosion of new supply coming to market, and then down a bit and up a bit, and we've settled. We're pretty stable over the last 6 or 8 months or so on average. In terms of number of sales, and this is where it gets that the story is a little different, and we see some fresh weakness coming into the market. So 604 sales in May versus 705 a year ago, down 14%, and down 11% from 2 years ago. So that's pretty consistent. And again, you look at that red line, which is the average over 6 months. We were seeing a lot of sales taking place as we came into the boom at the start of 2016, settled into that normal level, 6 to 800 a month again, then fell away as the market, as we topped out and buyers realized, holy moly, prices are falling. I don't want to catch a falling knife. So number of sales just collapsed to really very, very low levels indeed. And then they recovered a bit as we headed into the election, and they've been kind of stable for the last 2.5 years or so, but very recently a gradual erosion of number of sales taking place on average. But in particular in May, definitely a weak number, 604, down 14% on a year ago. And compared to what's normal in May, 707. So last May was bang on typical. This May, really significantly below. You can see the gap there is substantial. So, yeah, that's where you can see most obviously the weakness in the market. It's not the supply of properties coming on at a much greater rate, fairly typical supply of new stock. It was the number of sales taking place. So, given there's no change in new stock, that would suggest pulling back on behalf of the buyers. So the buyers just stepping back, lack of confidence perhaps from the buyers, maybe higher fuel prices and concerns about rising inflation again, squeezing wallets, concern about, am I going to lose my job? Wallets shut, cancel the upgrade in the house, these sorts of concerns possibly. And there it is in another form. So yeah, you can see that on average, given by the red line, the amount of sales taking place not substantially different than 6 months ago than we've seen in the past, and then 12 months ago, slightly less on average. But look at May; it's quite significantly less. So yeah, it is recent weakness. How long is it taking? Again, look at that red line. It's just gradually and consistently heading up and to the right. So at 53 days, 3 days longer than a year ago, 14 days longer than 2 years ago. But again, two things I think most relevant there. You see the shape of that red line, it's reasonably consistently going upwards, and it has been since the election. So 3 years now, and on average, 53 days versus what's typical for May at 41 days, significantly longer than normal in terms of how long is it taking to sell a house. Similar story with inventory. We saw big increases in inventory coming out of the election, as I explained before. Once the election was out of the way, everyone dumped their property on the market. Then it kind of stabilized throughout late 2024, throughout 2025. The last 6 or 8 months or so, we have seen gradual increases on average. So at 16.8 weeks, we are significantly down on where we were sort of 18 weeks last month. But overall, on average, in the last 6 months, it has continued to show consistent increases. So generally, these most of this data is not positive for sellers, unfortunately. So interesting, we're not that much more inventory than we typically see. So roughly 15 weeks is what's average on the long term, and we're at 17, but it is a lot more than what we have seen since 2015, which of course included that many years of a very tight market until 2022. So on average, that's been 10.8. So 17 weeks feels a lot longer than nearly 11. Listings on Trade Me. Again, you can see some seasonality happening there, and the last few months you can see there April, May, June, consistent decreases. That's just typical as we come into winter. The red line again showing the 6 month moving average. So that red line over the last 6 months is showing more listings on Trade Me than we have seen since 2015. And indeed for June, which was 5% more, as you can see there, compared to June last year, and 13% more compared to June 2024. If I look back at all the Junes back to 2015, we've got more supply on the market now this month than we have seen since any June since 2015. So again, more supply than we've seen for 11 years for this time of the year. And there it is in another form. So relatively stable once you're seasonally adjusted compared to last year. Still ever so slightly more, but not by very much, and reasonably consistently more by a small amount. So relative stability, but still at high levels, I suppose that's the message. So in summary, values have been flat to ever so slightly declining, but in particular, they have been soft again in the last few months. Listings, new listings, broadly stable, ever so slightly below May norms, but generally they have been stable. Sales volumes are down recently, and I say there in brackets, perhaps a result of impact on confidence from Iran and inflation and fuel costs and so on. Duration to sell remains long and has been relatively consistently and gradually increasing. Inventory is above long-term levels, down from last month, but still quite a lot of inventory, and Trade Me listings slightly up on a year ago. But of course, we're now coming down as we are now into winter. But overall, more stock than we've seen for 11 years. So the overall message to sellers is that values and sales volumes in particular have weakened very recently. I do have a question like now that there seems to be a bit more stability, and apparently we have this deal in Iran. Will that give us confidence? And oil prices have, of course, dropped down into the 70s today, I believe. Will that give us some confidence that we're not going to get this big rush of inflation? Maybe that will take pressure off the Reserve Bank to put interest rates up. So that might give some buyers a bit more confidence. But of course, we do have this question over the further cut of jobs in the public sector in Wellington. And buyers, yes, supply has contracted a bit. And as is typical for as we head into winter months, we are seeing new listing volumes on a weekly basis way, way lower than we saw, say, a month, 2 months, 3 months ago. And that can feel, I don't know, somewhat limiting in that it erodes your assumption that there's plenty of new listings coming on next week or the week after. Sometimes, as a buyer, you might start to feel a bit more constrained and, gee, maybe I should get on with it because there's not a ton of stock coming on. Relatively speaking, though, in terms of the gross supply volumes, there is still a ton of choice, more than we've seen for 11 years. So do get amongst it. So big thanks, of course, to Real Estate Institute and Real Estate for the data. I've got a couple of other slides. Now, Peter, you had a question. Just tell me if I get it wrong here. You're asking, am I seeing a lot of investors wanting to sell? What was the question? Am I seeing a lot of investors wanting to sell because of what? Um,
I,
to sell
um,
prior to the election.
it was just whether I can't haven't got my video working, but oh, here you are. But just
Are we seeing a lot of
options.
investors wanting to sell
Yeah,
before the
a lot of
election?
investors getting ready to sell before the election,
Is
and
that
to sort of
question
cash up.
yeah, is that question in particular because you're wondering are people concerned about a change of government and tax more tax coming into play or something?
Mainly because of the possible change of government, or they're just ready to, they're almost retired, so they're ready to sell now.
Okay, so that last point doesn't seem to be related to the election. But let me, I will do my best to answer your question. So, firstly, no. Sorry, yes, we are seeing plenty of investors looking to sell. Um, and this is also backed up. If any of you follow Tony Alexander's surveys, he has an interesting survey of property investors with, I think it's with Crockers, and they do that, is it monthly or 2 monthly or something? And the couple of questions he asks, he says, um, you know, who is looking to buy and who is looking to sell, and this goes to property investors. And so he tracks how many, you know, what proportion of property investors are looking to buy and what proportion are looking to sell. And then he nets them off against each other to come up with a balance to see which is stronger. And overall, for the last little while, his surveys have shown that for every one investor looking to buy, we have three or four looking to sell. So the sellers deeply outweigh the buyers. So their investors are net, property investors are net sellers very strongly at the moment. So that means if you have an investment property and you're wanting to sell it, um, that you are best to try and target invest buyers other than investors. So the ideal situation is, or the ideal kind of reasonably common situation for investors is if you can try and sell your property to a first home buyer if you've got something in your portfolio that can be presented as a home, not an investment. If you have to sell to an investor and you're trying to attract the attention of investors, A, it's going to be hard work. Um, B, there are very few investors around, so they will cherry pick the best quality, the best maintained, and the highest yielding properties. So you better be ready to get your property really in order, unless you are willing to compete aggressively on price, which most investors don't like doing. Now, I'm not suggesting don't sell. I myself have sold two investment properties that I owned with other people, and I'm taking my own medicine. In both instances, we put a considerable effort into getting the properties really shipshape. One of them was a 100-year-old two-story character villa in Newtown, and we would have put, I don't know, 50 or 60,000 into that property to get it ready to sell to make sure it was going to be appealing to a family, because it was a standalone home, wasn't two incomes or that sort of thing. And then the other one was a more modern townhouse, kind of 18 years old or so, that we built. And that was relatively easy to get that in ship shape. Having said that, 6 or 9 months before we sold it, we did an alteration to make it more appealing to owner occupiers by putting in some nice outdoor living and flow from the house into the outdoor living and that sort of thing. So you do need to make sure that you're trying to target the homeowners and presenting it well, because there's plenty of stuff for people to choose from. Um, so that was a
You know,
long way. That's a long way of saying no. Sorry, yes, we are seeing a lot of investors looking to sell, but it's not because of the election. It's because
uh,
their cash flow is completely getting crushed.
mm,
Costs are up, rates, insurance, maintenance, and rents are down, and vacancies are up. So yeah, no, it's just it's hard work out there. And so, yep, plenty of investors looking to sell. Yep.
Adam, are you noticing the investors who are looking, are they demanding quite a high yield from the whatever they're buying? Are they not looking for the 6, 7%? They're looking for more 8 or 9% return,
Well, Peter,
gross return.
that's a bit like saying the seller what does a seller want more money or less?
Yeah.
No? When you are the only investor buyer in the market and you have the pick of everything, you naturally are going to go for the best quality, highest income, lowest risk that you can. And of course, every investor is different, so they all have different bents, you know. Typically in the past, my priority has been yield, yield, and yield. And I would almost sacrifice anything else to get more yield because I wanted to grow my balance sheet as much as I could. And I needed that income, and I was willing to sacrifice effort, maintenance, management issues, that sort of thing to get the income as high as possible. Um, I have different priorities now. I'm older. I don't need to grow my balance sheet like I wanted to when I was younger. And so, I have sold a couple of things that I owned with other people. I've created some headroom for myself in terms of borrowing capacity. Got a bigger slush fund to accommodate punches from left field. And I am hopefully will be buying one, maybe two in the next 12, 18 months or something, and I will be wanting higher quality and I will willing to sacrifice some yield because I don't have the time and the bandwidth that I used to, and I'm not as demanding on needing the income quite so much. So, everybody's different. But yes, of course, um,
Mm.
when an investor can be that fussy, they obviously will go for, and we're seeing this across the board with anything. Properties that are not well maintained are really getting punished. Properties that have compliance issues are really getting punished. Present your property well, make sure it's well maintained, and for some time, well, typically investors are not known for maintaining their properties impeccably. There's a lot of pretty rough investment properties out there, and for a long time, and to be fair, a long time investors kind of got away with it, and they could sell these properties that weren't wonderfully maintained, and as long as they were in decent locations, could sell them at quite not very high yields, which means higher prices. But that's just not happening now. I mean, properties you yourself know. I know you've been out looking at some things. For example, that one in Prince Street you went to look at. I mean, ordinarily that's a sensational location, beautiful views of the city, right at the city end of Mount Victoria, multiple incomes. It's not an eight-bedroom boarding house. It's three flats or something like that, wasn't it? With small
Four
numbers.
flats. Yeah.
Yeah, four flats, small numbers of bedrooms per flat, great configuration, but it needed repiling and whatever else. And that in the end sold for, I can't remember, what was it? It was like a
A million. Yeah.
9% yield.
Yeah. It needed a huge amount of work
It
though.
needed a
We
huge
had
amount of work. Yes, exactly.
over
Exactly.
$350,000 worth of work at least.
Sure.
Um,
But you add that 350 in, you're still at 7.5% yield or something like that.
mm,
And
yeah.
so historically, a property like that would sell at a 4.5% yield.
Mm,
At least if it doesn't need hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work. But in the past, you could sell a property like that in bad condition, and it would still sell at a 6% return, or something like that. So
mm,
very, very different now, for sure.
mm.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
yeah. Good stuff. Good question. Thanks, Peter. All right, I've got a couple of other slides which I thought would be interesting. This here is for anyone who's thinking, as I've sort of indicated earlier, if anyone's thinking, I want to sell, but I don't want to sell in winter and I don't want to sell before the election, it's all too scary and uncertain, think again, because that's what everybody thinks. And with anything as in markets, when it's supply and demand, you want to bob when everyone else is duck when everyone else is diving, bob when everyone else is weaving. So this is the data from the last election. So the one on the left shows open home traffic, average number of attendees per open home. So we were at very low levels early 2023 as we approached the election here. This is the election here, the dotted line. As we approached the election, we reached a high of almost twice what it was. In fact, way more than twice what it was down here. What is it? Almost twice the long-term average. Long-term average is about 4.4 groups per open home. So at 8.7, a massive spike there as we headed into the election. After the election, back to average. And values, and this is as per the Real Estate Institute House Price Index, values in Wellington City increased by 10% as we headed into the election. And then after the election, they just collapsed away again. So obviously, I'm just putting this out there to dispel this ridiculous myth that selling in winter is a bad idea and selling before the election is a bad idea. If you are thinking of selling this year, or if you want to sell in the near future and you are thinking, I don't want to do it before the election, I would encourage you to reconsider. Obviously, if you want more advice on that, let me know. Happy to talk about your situation. Clearly, I want to sell your home. Um, and this is interesting, some data on the Wellington rental market. So I apologise for this mess down the bottom here. But what this shows is this is showing the blue line is average rents. And that's on the left-hand side there. And this is back to January 2016 here. And then the orange line is showing new rental listings coming to market. It's not total supply, it's new listings coming to market in the month. And so obviously what we see here is relatively stable new listing volumes for years. And then from early 2024, massive increases, broad stability over the last 12 months, except this bizarre peak here a few months ago, but at levels that are over twice what we've seen typically per month. Interestingly, there, if you really look closely, you might be able to persuade yourself that you're seeing the average new supply of listing volumes in the rental field coming down on average, but it's pretty variable. But at least it's not going up anymore. And the shocking thing here is we saw rents peak way back here about 2 years ago. And since that time, or even since as long as a year ago, we've seen rents come back by about 20% on average, which means that there are plenty of properties out there that have suffered reductions of more than 20%. So the rental market has been really very, very soft. Again, I say look at the last 6 months or so. We're seeing some stability in rental levels overall on average here, and we're not seeing new listing volumes increasing. So fingers crossed, this is as bad as it's going to get in the rental market. Many of you will have heard me say, possibly on more than one occasion, my theory about the student rental market, and that is that from 2021 to 2023, Victoria University numbers dropped by about 15%. This enabled this huge amount of capacity in the student halls, which meant that the first year students didn't have to come out of the halls and into the private rental market. They could stay in for longer. So whilst the university numbers might have dropped 15%, the number of students coming into the private market would have dropped by much more than 15%. So this has created extreme softness in the student rental market in particular. But from 2023 to 24, the numbers were about level. 2024 to 25, student numbers increased a bit. And 25 to 26, although they haven't published their numbers yet, all the articles I'm reading and anecdotal evidence is suggesting that the student numbers are up significantly on last year to the point where the halls of residence are again full. And so my logic suggests that if they are continuing to do a good job of attracting more business, because these things tend to move slowly, if they've been on the up in the last couple of years, they could well be up on the up again for the 2027 academic year. And if so, you will have a whole lot of year one students, because that's the other thing. The open day a few months ago at Victoria was way busier than it was. In fact, I think that was last year. Yeah, so that's probably we've probably seen all the benefit of that. It was way busier. But anyway, the halls of residence are full. So when they get the new first years in, all of those students are going to get squeezed out into the private rental market. So I'm hoping that we will see a lot more students looking for accommodation at the end of this year and the start of next year than we have seen for several years. And of course, whilst that is just students, and we still have relative softness in the labour market, employment market, that sort of thing. The rental market is far more connected, I believe, than the sales market, because when you're buying a property, you're really quite fussy about what you want to buy because you're going to be there for a long time and you own it. If you're just a tenant, you might be there for 1 year, 2 years. It's temporary. You can put up with compromises much more than you are willing to when you're buying it. And so the rental market's a bit more is much more fluid and connected, I think, than the sales market. So with of all these new students come into the market into this year, start of next year, then I'm hoping, touch wood, that the rental market softness that you can see in these graphs here clearly demonstrated will start to turn a corner and start improving again. So fingers crossed. Look, that's what I got for you tonight. Any questions? Anything anyone wants to discuss? No, sounds like we're done. Thanks for checking in, everyone. If you want individualized advice, obviously reach out. I want to help you sell your property. Yeah, feel free to get in touch anytime. Otherwise, thanks for checking in. Have a good month. And next month, I'm away in a week's time. And next month, I'm back on the 17th. So it'll be the week following that I do the update. All right. Here we go. I've got a question from Yagya. My understanding correct that values are flat as buyers are waiting, hesitating. Is there a way to know how many potential buyers there are? Is the pool of buyers increasing or flat? Well, I think we can see from the data we've looked at tonight is that buyers have been cautious. They're stepping back. No, there is no hard data, no measure that you're talking about. There are surveys out there like Tony Alexander asks questions like, "Are you planning to buy in the next 12 months?" And watching those movements is interesting. The actual boots on the ground is also very good. That's real-time feedback. How many people on average are attending open homes, which is like this data here. And so when we see this number increasing, in actual fact, that is more a reflection of changes in supply. But it's obviously it's the combination of how many buyers are out there looking versus how many properties are coming to the market at the time. And so, yeah, that there would be an interesting data point as well. But there's no one data point. But yes, there are values are flat or slightly eroding overall, clearly because sellers are more committed to doing a deal than buyers are committed to doing a deal. So we have a buyer's market. Yep. Hope that answers your question. Okay, folks, take care. Have a good month.